I wish it were as easy as in like the movie The Matrix. One red pill. Take one red pill. There's the truth. It doesn't work like that. You have to take red pills for the rest of your life. The first one's the hardest, but they keep coming. But my advice for someone who really doesn't want to be spoon-fed bullshit for the rest of their life, what you have to do is you have to work. Put effort into learning this subject. This isn't a subject you just walk in and expect to master in a couple of months. Like, don't think that. Ufology has exploded in the last 2 years. And you know, it's funny because 10 years ago, almost a decade ago, I wrote a book called After Disclosure. AD, After Disclosure. And you know, at that time, I wondered how might a disclosure event happen. And let me just be clear, I don't really think that we're at a point where we're ever going to see a truly, fully honest and open disclosure, in part because I think it isn't actually possible. I think too much information has been compartmentalized, particularly within the United States. I think too much of it's been privatized. I don't think that the United States president really has access to all the information, even legally, that the US president would want to have relating to UFOs. So I think this information has gone way beyond any kind of public accountability. But having said that, one thing I don't think I quite foresaw was how a faction that has government clearances would be able to position itself sufficiently to have allies in enough places to be able to get some kind of disclosure narrative out to the major media. And what I see is essentially a variation of a group of people who've been sort of floating around since the 1980s trying to get to the center of this labyrinth. Back then they were called the Aviary. Then during the 90s, a lot of them started working for Robert Bigelow. And I think they still do. I think they're still essentially a Bigelow club, as it were, but doing what they feel is the right thing to be able to push forward a disclosure type of narrative while staying within the law and while being able to use their connections to get media attention as much as possible. And that's, I think, what they're doing.
I think we've already had disclosure. There's so much...
The general public.
Okay, the general public, if disclosure is the President of the United States, if that's what that's going to be, where, you know, the President of the United States... Okay, use the New York Times article, make that disclosure. I mean, whatever. I mean, that to me is not disclosure. The ultimate disclosure, for me, disclosure is talking to all of the generals in Latin America who have problems with UFOs over their you know, bases and all the things that have happened in the military and so forth that they're trying to deal with. Pilots like Jean-Charles Duboc, who's flying Air France over Paris, sees a football-sized UFOs, had 300 people in the back that he's worried about. That's disclosure. That's disclosure. Mm-hmm. For me, disclosure, not that the president needs to say anything. So are we closer to that? For anybody that does the work, anybody that does studying, we've already had disclosure. Now, what do you want to do about it? Now that it's real, what do you want to do about it? That's the next question. What do you want to do about it? And what's the state? Unfortunately, in the United States of America, it's entertainment. Yeah. So it's entertainment in every form that you can see it, whether you're wearing the T-shirt or whether you hang out with a bunch of groupies, or you have idols that you look at on TV and everywhere. That isn't taking the responsibility for the fact that we're not alone. It's a little bit too much entertainment. So in the last 3 years, I've done most of my work in Latin America. That's a whole different world down there. They're having contact and they can see it clearly and they don't care. They make money off it, and it's just a whole different world in Latin America. So that's my direction. That's my answer.
When I wrote my first 2 volumes of history, I was very consciously at times focusing on military dimensions of this. Because why? Because I instinctively knew when you have a military that is unable to compete with these other objects, that's a national security issue. And that makes it important in some ways. Now, does that make these objects a threat? Well, it depends on how you define threat. They haven't engaged in shooting as far as we know, shooting our aircraft down. However, they have engaged in activities that can be defined as hostile or threatening if they are oversensitive areas where they're not supposed to be. If they're snooping around areas where no one's supposed to be snooping around, any military is going to see that as a threat. I mean, to a hammer, every problem's going to look like a nail, and to a military person, every unknown craft that's over sensitive areas, it's not supposed to be there, is going to be perceived as a threat. That's normal. So I don't blame the military people for using that word. People can disagree. I think part of it, frankly, is a political move on their part. Political in the sense of, when you're dealing with a completely bored and uninterested public, uninterested media, a hostile scientific community, you're trying to get their attention. How do you do that? Well, one way, obviously, is to play up the potential threat. So I think part of this is simply a convenient narrative for them to use to advance that program of theirs, which is to push forward this subject in the mainstream.
Yeah, they're not there to please the UFO community, are they, really?
No, well, there's never pleasing the UFO community. I mean, never. There are people who are, and it's one thing to be critical. We should always be critical. It's another thing even to be suspicious. But when you are so suspicious that you are truly paranoid about every single thing that they're doing, without really even listening to them, then there's a problem. So I think that there have been UFO researchers who all that they do is pick apart the alleged motives of these guys, without actually even listening to what they've said. I mean, think about it. If we were to go back in time 3 years ago, could we have predicted where we would be in terms of mainstream coverage of the UFO subject today? And I think the answer is no. The one thing that we have to know is tomorrow will not look like today. We're in such a tumultuous time. This is one thing that I think I did get right 10 years ago when I wrote After Disclosure, which is that you've got two impossibilities. You've got how did I call it? I said that disclosure was impossible and inevitable. It was a paradox. I always perceived disclosure as impossible because there was no motivation for those people truly in the secret who've had it to want to give it up. It was too revolutionary, it was too disruptive. And I still think that is true. But it's also inevitable because one thing I did perceive is that our society, our civilization is in a constant state of revolution now, technologically. Particularly, that's changing how we relate to each other socially and intellectually. We can Skype each other around the world. We can trade information in ways that were not imaginable more than a decade ago, certainly not more than 20 years ago. So there's too much that's changing, and I've always perceived that state, that technological infrastructure, as it were, is making things very unstable, very in flux. And I do believe that this movement now that we're seeing, this insider faction movement, and that is how I perceive TTSA, it's made it possible for them to do the things that they're doing. This could not have happened 10 years ago because I don't think we had this infrastructure. So I think we can expect more change. Now, where it's going to go is a good question. Every week it seems more toothpaste is coming out of the tube. It can't go back in. So now we're at a point where we have Navy pilots talking openly about men in black suits coming onto the USS Princeton, stealing radar data after a UFO encounter in 2004. Like, that's kind of interesting to hear about. And we're hearing much, much more about military encounters that are being fully acknowledged. So that doesn't go back in the tube. Now, where will it go? Well, the question is, how far can it go? So if we get to an acknowledgement, we're already at an acknowledgement that's well beyond what we could have imagined 2 years ago, where we have high-level government officials and scientists who are talking openly about this phenomenon. I'm thinking of a speech that Hal Puthoff gave a year ago at the Society of Scientific Exploration, 2018. An unbelievable speech that every single person connected with this field should know about. He's talking about an artifact that has been studied, that is of bismuth and magnesium of such a fine level of manufacture we can't reproduce it here. And he all but said it was extraterrestrial. It's unbelievable. So we're getting to a point where more and more of this is coming out. And I am waiting for the avalanche. So we're getting a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. When will we get to a critical mass where suddenly we'll realize, as it were, the emperor is wearing no clothes, and this is a real thing. I think that that will happen. And the real question is, well, when will that happen? I think it could happen within 5 years from now. I didn't always think that it could be within 5 years. I now think it could be. But the real question is, unlike how I predicted in my earlier book, would it lead to the true ripping open of all the veils of secrecy? Probably not. It's too much of this that is sequestered. If the US President Trump right now were to demand within the Defense Department all of the access to these secrets, it's a real question as to whether or not he would have access to it. What we have is a runaway privatization of UFO information, and privatized in a way that appears to be legal within the system. So that is, in the US, people will pay taxes to a government that will then protect the intellectual property of private corporations so that they can make money off of this technology. The government will use its laws to protect the security of these private corporations, keeping all relevant Defense Department personnel out. And how high does it go? Do they lock the president out? I would say, I don't know for a fact, but I would say probably yes.
I really think, let's have faith that they look at something like the citizen hearing that we did, and that actually Steve Bassett did. 39 men and Linda Howe in front of those Congress people and former senators. We did it in Washington, D.C., at the Washington Press Club. We had people from England, we had people from Italy, and we had a lot of people from Latin America. And the people from Latin America were generals who are very nervous about their air bases, and they were military people that were looking at it for national security situations. Any more than 5 days of a citizen hearing, I don't know what kind of disclosure you want. Those guys are telling the truth. Those were retired Congress people and senators. It was amazing. I was there during the whole thing, and I was sitting as a researcher. I said, this is it. This is it. It's not just America. It's Latin America. It's Italy. It's France. We have England who are testifying in front of these people. It was a mock testimony. It didn't matter. They're talking about real cases. They talked about Rendlesham Forest. They talked about Latin America. They talked about Virginia. Asia Gevard from Brazil talked about the Virginia case. But, you know, the future researcher has to care about those cases. And by the way, we're not reptilians, greys, and Nordics. Virginia doesn't even go into any of those categories as far as the beings that they recovered there. So got to get off of the entertainment angle and the images we're seeing from modern ufology, which is ridiculous. Because if you study individual cases and you talk to somebody like Clifford Stone, who had a manual for 57 different species, because when they went to do the crash retrieval, they didn't want to hurt them, so he'd have to look at the manual to see what you could do for first aid, and we live with reptilians, greys, and Nordics, then something's wrong with the real study of this. So my job as a lecturer is to set it straight.
When I started researching this, I was 32, 33 years old. And I thought back then that I was ahead of the curve, that I knew more things than most people. I was very proud of that. I'd studied in the university, I was working on a PhD in history, and then I came to this point where I stumbled into this subject, UFOs, and I thought, there's something interesting here, and I don't like having a big question mark hanging over my head. Is there something there, or is there not something there? I want to know. I don't like not knowing. So I thought I would spend 2 or 3 months of my life to research this and then move on. Well, that was over 25 years ago. What I discovered, not only was it real, but it was real in such a way that for the first year that I studied it, I distinctly remember staring at the bedroom ceiling many, many nights, trying to figure things out, realizing if then if this is true, then what does this say about all these other things I thought I knew? So it was difficult, and I can tell you I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to have to rethink my entire worldview. That was the last thing I wanted to do. When you get into your 30s and beyond, you like to think that you've got the world figured out. You're ready to join the world of professional, whatever it is you do, and you don't want to have to like reinvent the wheel. And I think looking back in my early 30s back then, I was probably at the perfect age. If I had gotten any older, it would have been really hard for me. But I was old enough that I had studied enough that I knew that I was onto something. So it was really a good age for me. But for young people now who are diving into this, I can tell them, you know, it's a challenge. It is difficult. But the one thing that you have to know is that the act of maturing, the act of growing into the person you are destined to be, requires you to strip away the illusions you were born into. And not just one time, many times. Illusions about your society, illusions about yourself, mostly. And that's hard. No one wants to do that. But if you really want to grow, you've got to strip away. I wish it were as easy as in like the movie The Matrix. One red pill. Take one red pill. There's the truth. It doesn't work like that. You have to take red pills for the rest of your life. The first one's the hardest, but they keep coming. But my advice for someone who really doesn't want to be spoon-fed bullshit for the rest of their life, right? What you have to do is you have to work. So you have to unlearn, but that doesn't mean you just throw everything out. You have to put effort into learning this subject. This isn't a subject you just walk in and expect to master in a couple of months. Like, don't think that. It's an arrogant mistake, and too many people make it. I spent, for the first 5 years, I read hundreds of books, and I didn't just read them. I meticulously took notes and created a chronological database of facts with citation. Like, I really got into it. But it enabled me, it forced me to learn this history. And I can tell you it was worth every bit of effort and sweat that went into it, because there's an enormous factual database here. This is not a trivial subject. It's a difficult subject. So I would just, if someone is serious, if they're really serious, then throw yourself into this and learn it. And don't just learn it around the edges. There's an enormous amount of case history in here. There's an enormous amount of politics in here. There's a lot going on. So give it the respect it demands and do the work.
I have just, in the last 3 years, met Jacques Vallée, and it's really ironic because it's almost full circle. That was the character in Close Encounters that I admired. That's, you know, he was the one that went out there and said, "Allez, allez," you know, make the sounds bigger so we can hear you. And he is the one that went all over the world to India and everything to find out the answer. And really, it is an intellectual pursuit to look at this and connect the dots. If you're going to connect dots, you need to know all of it. You can't just know a little piece of it. And you have to put the puzzle together. And that's if you want, and if that's what your purpose is, to know it, to know all of it. And I'm looking out there, and I don't see any situation like that. That's why I always say, can we do a college course? Can some university take this on? I do teach online classes for Dr. Michael Sala, and you can get an exopolitics degree taking about 6 classes. I do teach some of those classes. And all people have to do is read all the material and write an essay or a paper. But that's the way we used to do it in the old days as a teacher.
Yeah.
I used to demand, but I'll tell you something, if as a teacher today, if I asked you to write a paper on something and you gave me YouTube as your source, I would not, you'd have to, I would, in your footnotes, I would not give you any kind of good grade. So it is a dilemma. It is a dilemma that we don't have either a school or a direction for young people.
It's a funny thing. I've have two children. They're grown now, in their early 20s. My daughter, who is amazing, but she went through her period when she was 10, 11, 12 years old, but she just thought her father was the neighborhood nut, right? So I remember back then she came into my office surrounded by UFO books, and in her breathy voice said, "Dad, why can't you be a normal dad like all the other dads?" I laughed, I laughed at her. And I think I said, "Are you old enough to be taking drugs? Because that's the only excuse that I can give you for why you would say something so ridiculous. Your dad can never be like this." Like, it's in my DNA. I have to be this way. So I'm always asking questions, and I gave up a lot. I'm just going to say, like, I had a nice career path in front of me. I thought I was going to teach at some university and have a nice little life there. I cannot tell you how glad I am that I avoided that road for many reasons and went on to be an independent writer and historian. One thing that has to be said, when you study any element of UFOs long enough, and to me, I study all of it. I don't just study sightings of military encounters. I've studied all types of sightings and abductions and all cases of alleged consciousness contact, you can say, with other types of entities, and I listen to it all. And I also will say that there's a definite mental consciousness element to the UFO subject. And I've also studied remote viewing, not as a participant, but I have studied. I married a remote viewer, but even before I married her, I've been fascinated by the remote viewers, partly because they all seem to encounter extraterrestrial in one form or another. So the study of UFOs has taken me into a lot of strange things, a lot of woo, and a lot of it I think is totally legit. So I think you have to take consciousness-related things into effect when you study this phenomenon. But having said that, I will say I think that a lot of what we might call New Age culture has been extremely damaging to the UFO field and actually a really negative influence. I think as it has to society in general. The idea of create your own reality is good in a way, but is really bad in a way. It enables people not to look at negativity, because then they say that gives negativity power. Well, that's a really great way to destroy your life and your society, by not looking at the problems that are there. So you have to acknowledge problems so that you can fight them and defeat them. You can't just run away from them. So there's an element of the New Age culture that it really does create its own little bubble, and it's a bad, bad place to be. So, and it also invites a lot of fakers, charlatans, and the people who are really strong believers are, I'm not going to name names, but are just so unbelievably naive. I'm astonished that they just believe every new person who comes along with their own story. Just lately I've spoken to a number of folks who've got good knowledge of this from the classified world. I hate doing this. I hate sounding mysterious. So I apologize. But I will just give my opinion that private corporations, private, powerful corporations are probably making their own number of what we would think of as UFOs. And that would mean space-based UFOs as well. Mm-hmm. So I think there's I called it a breakaway civilization 10 years ago. I think that that's a real thing. So there's that. And there's also a number of these that are not part of us. They're not our civilization. They're beyond. Mm-hmm. Whether they're from another planet or, there's different theories as to what these other beings are. Are they from another, are they from here and live here? Have they lived here all along? Can they phase into our reality in some way? Are they right in front of our noses, but they phase in and out? There's all different theories about this. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the answer, but I do believe that there's a component of this phenomenon that is not from our human civilization.
Well, one of the cases that I worked on that I'm very close to is the 1945 crash in San Antonio, New Mexico, and I've been working on it for 7 years. A craft did crash to little Mexican boys saw it. They went up to the craft, they saw the beings, and they even have a piece of the metal. I mean, this really happened in 1945. And then Roswell 2 years later. And these whatever's there, and then there's Aztec and Corona and the other crashes in the New Mexico area. New Mexico is where White Sands is. It's where the Trinity site is, where the atomic bomb was tested. In July of 1945, when the atomic bomb was tested, it caught somebody's attention. So what are we going to do with this new technology? We have it, then the Russians have it, and I think whoever is flying out there is watching what we're going to do with it. I think there's a twofold purpose. I think it's to get the attention of the common people. If you look up, and this is true with everybody, and you see a UFO, it changes your life. And I think they wanted to change a few people's lives. So I don't know whether they were shot down or the high-powered radar stopped them. But another thing about New Mexico, if you've ever been there, there's terrible, terrible thunderstorms. And if you're in one of those and you're interacting with all of this, I think that some of these were just, regular, accidents. I think we began shooting them down later. I think that, the ones that in the Pacific coast that they've tried to shoot down and so forth at other places in other countries. But I think during the 1940s in New Mexico, I think part of it was the meteorological, which is very tricky there, and the high-powered radar.
There has been an interest in America, partly, at least go back to the 40s, because of the nuclear technology. So America was clearly the world's leader in nuclear tech back in the 40s and 50s. Think of the Roswell incident that occurred in the very close proximity of the only nuclear-armed base in the world at the time. I don't think that's an accident. In the 1940s and 50s and 60s particularly, we know of a large number of UFO encounters in which these objects were seen over sites dealing with nuclear technology and nuclear manufacture, whether Oak Ridge Laboratories in Tennessee, or Los Alamos National Labs, or the Hanford Atomic Energy Commission plant in the state of Washington, or many others. Uranium mines, even in the Belgian Congo. We have a report from 1952 on that. So there's a nuclear connection. Looks real to me. And so that would definitely involve the Americans in the early period, without a doubt. America in the late 40s, early 50s was unquestionably the world's leading military power. It still is. So if you're an outside intelligence looking at the leading weaponry of planet Earth, yeah, you couldn't avoid the United States. But of course, what we know is UFOs are seen everywhere. They're seen in Britain. They're seen in Russia. They're seen throughout Europe. They're seen in China. We know about this. They're probably seen in Africa more than we are getting reports. We have some African reports, but not a lot. But a lot of it has to do with the infrastructure for reporting these things. So within North America, I'll include Canada here, the US and Canada, in my view, have by far the best reporting mechanisms that I'm aware of in the world to take in raw reports. We've got two websites that are amazing. We've got the National UFO Reporting Center, and we have the MUFON website, and both of those will take 6,000 to 7,000 sightings a year. And there's not a lot of overlap, I don't think. I'm not aware of such websites existing anywhere else in the world. So I think what we really need more of, much more of, is websites to collect national, even raw reports from citizens from around the world, and then we can really get an idea of where these things are being reported. It's a horrible lack of knowledge when you think about it. I mean, U.S. and Canada have comprised a small percentage of the global population, and they're pulling down 15,000 plus sightings a year of raw reports. You have to assume there's even much more activity elsewhere in the world, and we're not getting a tiny fraction of it. So we need that data.
The interest of whatever, and I'm not going to commit to whatever's visiting. It's the interest. They're going to go where things are happening that are going to change the timeline of a species. And the timeline of a species, inventing the atomic bomb, and then the hydrogen bomb. I mean, one of the cases I did in Italy was a French geophysicist, Guy Andronique, that was on the island of Fangatofa in the Bikini Atoll, where the French did 800 H-bomb tests. That killed all the coral, all the fish. You don't think, and he had flyovers of UFOs. So I interviewed him in Europe. He said on 2 occasions we had 3 UFOs come over the base. On 2 occasions. Why would 3 UFOs come over a base in the Bikini Atoll where they are bombing the coral and bombing the fish to test a hydrogen bomb? And it isn't the States, it was France that time, because India's done some too. America's done some too. You don't think that that causes alarm somewhere in the cosmos?
What's your take on the whole Apollo mission and the moon landing? Is your research taking you down that route?
A little bit.
Did we land on the moon?
Yes, I think we landed on the moon. I do. I think we landed on the moon. But I will say that I also believe that we were followed and accompanied and observed on the moon. This is my opinion. I don't think that we did not go. I think we did go. And we could spend probably an hour on the reasons why I think we went. Too many missions. I mean, they even included Apollo 13 where they almost died. Like they faked that one. I think that we went. I don't think that the obstacles for landing were insurmountable, although they were difficult. But I think that there was more going on. I think that we have been observed on every single space-based mission that we've had, probably. And that's really what, there have been some good insiders from NASA who, we know their names, we know their jobs, they've gone on the record and they've made these statements countless times, and all different people. So I think that's the truth. And I believe, actually, my colleague Timothy Good from the UK, who wrote about this, I spoke with him personally about it. He had an associate who's no longer alive, but attended a function in which this individual eavesdropped on a conversation that Neil Armstrong was having at a function, where a medical doctor asked Armstrong what really happened on the moon, that type of thing. And this individual overheard Armstrong essentially say that they were being monitored and watched. I asked Tim about that, and he said, look, this individual, rock solid. And that's just one. There's a lady named Donna Hare who worked at a NASA subcontractor called Philco Ford. She has her own stories. She's talked a lot about how all the Apollo astronauts had constantly been talking about being followed on the moon, on their way to and back from the moon. So I think the Apollo missions were monitored. And, I also think that there's a covert presence there. Can't say with 100% certainty, but I would say if I had to bet a lot of money on it, I would say yes. And I think that there's other elements of a clandestine secret space program that also exist, that have enabled us using technology, some of which is off the shelf and some of which is not off the shelf and is still classified, to engage in activities in our solar system, at the very least, that no one knows about.
You've got to understand that that was a major undertaking that NASA did, because if they landed, I don't know how they even worked it out, but if they landed and there was something there, that would have gone viral all over the world. So there's a lot of controversy about that. The other thing is that I don't necessarily think the moon belongs to the United States. So I'm not sure that I really am excited about putting the United States flag there. I think we should have put a world flag there and represented all the species. Now China's there, and Russia went there, and everybody went there. So we don't have to worry about that. I think that when mankind put his foot down, somebody knows that we did that. I did talk to Ingo Swann, who remote viewed the dark side of the moon. And I asked Ingo, I said, I hear there's like bases and, non-human intelligence on the dark side of the moon. And he said to me, also on the light side. So I'm thinking, okay, well, somebody's there. So they're going to notice if we went there. It is historic, however. And just now, it just came out that Neil Armstrong was on a cruise with Alan Hynek and asked to speak to Alan about this. So about his work with UFOs. So the interest of any astronaut, if they're an intellectual, is going to be, is there life out there? I mean, of course.
Do you believe we landed on the moon?
Absolutely, because I knew Edgar Mitchell. And I knew him very, very, very well. Dr. Edgar Mitchell. He passed on too. It's really hard. And he's not, he goes into detail with his going there, the epiphany he had, feeling one with the stars. He landed on the moon, he lost his camera. A lot of things happened to him. And then he came back and left that position and started the noetic sciences. He started a more, not, I want to say spiritual, but more quantum physics explaining spirituality type of path. You only do that if you're flying among the stars. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but I truly believe the early contactees, the Adamskis, the Mengers, and other contactees that say that they were given a ride, and even Charles Hall in his case, the Charles Hall case said that the generals on the Indian Springs facility were taken for a ride, and so it's normal. People have to get over it. I think that our technology is hundreds and hundreds and years ahead of what we think it is. I can't believe the hidden technologies that there could be. We just don't know about it.
I think we've gone back. I think that there's some kind of component there. I don't know if it's manned or not, but it could be. But definitely, I think we've gone back in a clandestine. I think that there's, I would say strongly that I think that there's been a classified manned space program for some time. And that this undoubtedly, and I'm saying this because I know I have reasons to say this, has a connection to a UFO/alien component to it. So there's a classified manned space program that at some level deals with the UFO phenomenon. Now, what is the level of their technology? I don't know how advanced they are. I don't think that they can manufacture the kinds of meta materials that we heard Hal Puthoff talking about a year ago in his lecture of nano and angstrom level engineering that I don't believe we've got the capability to do. But I do think that in a number of ways we've achieved certain kinds of breakthroughs in propulsion, maybe some in material science, but definitely propulsion that are enabling us to go places. Look, the United States has an overwhelming amount of what one author called blank spots on the map. So these are places that are not on any Google Earth image that you're going to find. And they are very, very classified, and you can't go in there. So I don't know how much of this world is filled with it, but a lot. There are technologies to build deep, deep, deep facilities well under the ground, deep under the ground that people will never have access to. There's a lot of, particularly out in the American West, there's a lot of nothing out in many of these areas, and you can't get to them. So they do what they want. They are a law unto themselves. Americans are a nation that was founded on a principle. And I don't know they self-consciously founded their nation on a principle having to do with the rights of individual people and the rights of people to have government responsive to them, not the reverse. It's a big, big part of the American psyche, I can tell you. And so it's, even now, we're in a new era in the 21st century. And that's being beaten down, in my view. But it's still there. And it's there, it's more there in America than in any other nation I know of. I've done enough travel, and there's a lot of beautiful places in this world, but Americans are pugnacious, and that's an annoying quality, but it can be a good quality. And so within the United States, Americans, many of them, do not like the fact that they can't get answers from their government on this matter. And it bothers them to no end. I'm one of those Americans. It bothers me to no end. I don't know if I'll ever get all that I want. I probably won't. But it's something I believe in. That's the truth. I get misty-eyed about it when I think of it too, to be honest with you. I think that there's something beautiful about that vision of how to create a nation in which the government is responsible to you. And I'm never giving that up. That they'll pry that ideal out of my cold, dead fingers.
One of the people I was close to was Monsignor Corrado Balducci of the Vatican. And we used to have long talks about this, and he was right. He's no longer with us. He'd say, why did God just create humans on one planet when there's thousands of planets out there? He said, he created humans on all kinds of planets out there, except that they're not still fighting and killing each other. This planet is hypocritical because the words of Christ are love your brother as yourself and love God first. I mean, those are two great commandments. Who's doing any of that? Everything that we do on this planet is contrary to the spiritual. I'm not going to call it religious, because religion is also a political system. The Catholic Church was a political system during the Renaissance and before. The spiritual is in conflict with what the great masters said. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing now. And so you honestly think that whoever's on those other planets, and I really do a lot of lecturing on human type ETs, are doing the same thing? How could they get here? How could they have a technology to go wandering around the universe if they were wasting time killing each other? So what the problem could be is that we need to change our worldview, as John Mack said, the person I admire the most. He said we need to change our worldview to accommodate the fact that there could be other populations that are far more evolved, and that we are not the virus of the universe, but we could raise our consciousness so we make it a point to travel among the stars and meet these people. People don't even know they're alive. They're walking around. I was in San Francisco and walking through the park. Most gorgeous views I've ever seen of the Bay Bridge and everything. Everybody's on their cell phone talking about their problems in the middle of a gorgeous park with all these flowers. And I'm going, the ETs are watching this thinking, are these people even appreciating breathing? It's like consciousness, in the terms of what I want to do with StarWorks USA, and I'm on my 7th conference, is bringing people to have an intellectual discussion about what humanity could be if humanity were awake and aware, and what we could do, not only in terms of saving this planet for our children, our children's children's children, but what we could do to evolve as humans. Now that also includes using ESP, looking at the paranormal as normal, communicating with our people that have passed over, appreciating the Native American heritage, appreciating all the ancient cultures. This is all part of consciousness. To know that the human species is special. And that's what I think consciousness is. Evolving, growing up, going to grad school and not staying in 3rd grade. It gets to be really crazy. We live in a crazy earth. So what I'd like to do is go to the consciousness component, which becomes a more spiritual, more elevating, and the evolutionary component of the ufology field. So we could do something there. We could become something there. We can control that because it's about us, not about them.